every offseason, there are certain players that just seem to fall through the cracks. Let's talk about those. Welcome into Fantasy Baseball today on Thursday, March 20th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Scott White and Chris Towers. Today on the show, players we haven't talked enough about. The Cubs-Dodgers 2-game series is over. We'll take a look at that. But first, it certainly seems like we have another big pitching injury, and let's get right into it. Jared Jones was scratched from his final spring start as he's dealing with right elbow discomfort. Apparently, he felt it in his most recent bullpen session and is already going for a second opinion, which is always ominous. Chris, is he just off our draft boards until we learn more?
No. You can select him in the reserve rounds or with one of your final picks of your draft. And I think he went for $2 or $3 in an auction that I'm doing tonight that is somehow still going on. And that's probably a wasted $2 or $3. But if it's the Gavin Williams injury from last year and he comes back in June or July and you get 3 decent months out of Jared Jones, I think it's fine. It's a little worrisome. I mean, just beyond the fact that his elbow's hurt, it's very worrisome. But what I mean is that if you looked at how Jared Jones pitched last year, I looked this up today. No pitcher in baseball had a larger drop-off. No starter had a larger drop-off between their average first inning velocity. For him, it was 98.7 miles per hour, and his fifth inning velocity, which was 96.4. His average fastball dropped 2.4 miles per hour from the fifth to the first to the fifth inning in his starts last year. Only one other starter was even above 1.7 miles per hour. So
how does one even find this information?
You can do a search on Baseball Savant, and then you got to do a VLOOKUP in Excel, and it's a whole
goodness.
Yeah. Well, it took impressed. Like 30 seconds, but yeah.
It would have taken me 30 minutes, but that's interesting. What scares me most about it is the second opinion. Like normally you don't go for a second opinion if the first opinion is exactly what you want to hear.
The first opinion's usually not, hey, your elbow's great. Keep it up.
The director of sports medicine for the Pirates did say, I don't want to be an alarmist.
Yeah.
Which maybe was a hint that it's not a worst case scenario. But that's really all I can cling to right now. If I want to be optimistic, I moved Jared Jones behind like Grayson Rodriguez and Sean Manaea. But I'd be, just because I was trying to find a middle ground, but I'd be much more reluctant to draft him if I was drafting right now than those other two.
Yeah. And especially for a pitcher who throws extremely hard, as you pointed out, Chris, and uses his slider as much as he does. He throws that pitch hard too. So those two things in conjunction doesn't feel great right now for Jared Jones. We'll wait to learn more, but if you're drafting in the next couple of days before we find out, maybe just wait until one of the final picks of your draft before you select Jared Jones. Who is next up for the Pirates? Well, I think the one we would want most for fantasy is Bubba Chandler, who's one of their top prospects. But Pirates beat writer Noah Hiles speculated that Thomas Harrington might get the first shot. He's another prospect. He's still in Major League camp. Bubba Chandler has already been sent down to minor league camp. They could easily change those things, I guess, if they wanted to, but maybe they want an extra year of control, whatever it might be. Thomas Harrington, he was good last year in the minors, a 2.61 ERA, .96 whip, known more for command, kitchen sink type approach. He's 23 years old. Scott, if Jared Jones is out for a lengthy period of time, do you have any interest in Thomas Harrington, or are you just hoping that it's Bubba Chandler who gets the call?
I'm hoping it's Bubba Chandler. Thomas Harrington could be useful, but he is the lower upside, higher floor guy who didn't crack my top 100 prospects. Came close. Harrington was in consideration for that. The numbers in the minors last year were really good, but particularly for a minor leaguer, you want to see the missed bats most of all, and Harrington falls a little short in that regard. Worth monitoring if he does get a look, but not somebody I'd be rushing out to the waiver wire to pick up outside of really deep leagues.
So, I mean, if you're drafting in the next couple of days, Scott, are you looking to use a reserve round pick on Bubba Chandler just in case?
I mean, it depends how deep the league is. Would I go for Bubba Chandler over what's a guy who's been rising lately?
Griffin Canning?
Probably over Griffin Canning, but I wouldn't do it over like Richard Fitz.
So Chris mentioned in his reserve rounds, Michael Soroka or Max Meyer. Would you take Bubba Chandler over both of those?
I would not take him over Soroka. I'd consider it over Meyer. Meyer has the Marlins disadvantage.
Yeah. What about Jeffrey Springs?
In a shallow league, I might just gamble on the upside, pick Chandler. A shallow league where I think Springs is going to be fringy all year, then I might gamble on Chandler. But standard size leagues, deeper leagues, I'd stick with Springs.
Chris, did Bubba Chandler get drafted in the auction you're doing?
No.
We'll take him in the reserve round.
I do have one more reserve round pick. So
please
maybe
take him just in case. Let's see what happens.
Oh, wait. No, he did get picked.
In the auction or in the reserve rounds?
In the reserve.
Gotcha.
I don't think it'll be Chandler who replaces Jones for what it's worth.
Yeah.
I think Chandler will be up at some point this season. Yeah. Probably not opening day, even with this injury. So, again, Jared Jones dealing with right elbow discomfort. We'll wait to learn more, but going for a second opinion, it sounds pretty ominous as of now. Freddie Freeman missed both games in Tokyo with that rib injury. Not overly surprising. Dave Roberts said he expects Freeman to play in their domestic series, their first domestic series against the Angels. Ranger Suarez has been scratched from his next start due to mild back stiffness. Suarez went on the IL last year with back soreness as well.
Yeah, that's concerning for a guy who was already pretty fringy. I threw him out there in my auction tonight for $2. It got real close to me ending up with him, and I would not have been happy with that. Somebody did go 3, so it worked out.
Yeah, and I don't think we have nearly as fun of an option to replace him. It probably would be Taijuan Walker.
Why
who got booed in a spring game today.
If you didn't want him for 2, why wouldn't you just throw him out for 1?
Oh, but it was early. It was like 60 people in. So I was hoping somebody was like, I've got lots of money. Who cares?
Yeah, that's fine. But they'd do that if you put him out there for 1.
Right. I was trying to take an
I understand throwing somebody out for 2 because you don't want to go 3 on him.
No, I was just trying to steal an extra $1 from someone.
Okay.
Jose Altuve will indeed open the season as the Astros' primary left fielder, and good luck to them. He has made some bad plays. He dropped another fly ball here on Wednesday.
And they don't, it's not like they have some great option ready to go at second base.
He was bad at second base last year.
Really bad. Third percentile outs above average. And they have a lot of ground ball pitchers, so.
But at least he's not embarrassing himself on routine plays like is happening in left field.
I think he's gonna be fine.
Okay.
I'm not that worried about
this. It's been multiple flubs.
Yeah, it'll happen.
It means he will gain outfield eligibility, but I imagine most people want to use Altuve at second base for fantasy anyway. D-backs manager Torey Lovullo said he won't name a closer before the start of the season and will instead play matchups. That means Justin Martinez and AJ Puck will both kind of cannibalize each other's fantasy value unless one of them emerges. Do you guys have a preference?
Yeah, that's what I got from the report. They just haven't decided yet, and they're going to let it play out. And I have them back-to-back in my relief pitcher rankings with Martinez ahead since he's the right-hander and the incumbent. He has those 2 advantages. But I think by the end of April, one will clearly pull ahead of the other.
I do think both are in play in saves plus holds leagues. So if you play in that format, you should be drafting Justin Martinez and AJ Puck. Christian Walker is on track to return to game action this weekend. He's been dealing with a sore oblique since early March, but has been swinging a bat. Zach Geloff left after getting hit by a pitch on his right hand. He'll undergo x-rays to learn more. Manager Mark Kotze said he believes Geloff will be fine, hopefully. Ronel Blanco left Wednesday after taking a line drive off his right wrist. He told reporters afterwards that he's fine. Alex Cora reiterated that Tristan Casas will be an everyday player against both lefties and righties, which is great for his counting stats. Hopefully he's not so bad against lefties that it plummets his batting average. Mason Wynn is aiming to return to spring games on Friday. He's dealing with right wrist soreness. Paul Goldschmidt also aiming to return on Friday. He's dealing with a back injury. Jurickson Profar scheduled to return to the lineup on Thursday. He's been out dealing with a bone bruise in his left wrist. We didn't get to this yesterday. I don't think it matters too much, but the Braves signed Craig Kimbrell to a minor league contract on Tuesday. Don't think there's any fantasy value, right?
Something would have to go wrong.
Very wrong.
Yeah. If Craig, like the plan is to bring him up as soon as he's ready to come up. I imagine if he's walking everybody inside at AAA, that plan will change. The minor league deal gives the Braves some flexibility in that regard, but the stated plan is we're going to get him ready to go at AAA, and then we'll call him up, which means I presume Kimbrell would be the backup plan for saves if something happened to Iglesias. I did my bullpen breakdown for all 30 teams yesterday, and I put him second in the pecking order for saves for the Braves.
Do they really not have anybody else they can go to?
The leading candidate would probably be Dylan Lee, who's a left-hander. There's also Pierce Johnson. But yeah, their bullpen depth is kind of thinned out with I can't think of his name. The guy who got injured, who was their main setup man last year, Jimenez.
Yeah, Joe Jimenez.
Joe Jimenez, yeah.
The Rangers signed Patrick Corbin to a 1-year major league contract on Tuesday. Last year, Corbin posted a .562 ERA and a .150 WHIP. He is pretty much toast, but when he's ready, I assume he'd take a spot from one of Jack Leiter or Kumar Rocker if they are not performing, only because this is a major league contract. Maybe you guys feel differently, but not that we care about Patrick Corbin, but it could take a spot from somebody else.
I think that's the likeliest outcome, just because I think the likeliest outcome is by the end of April, one or both of Kumar Rocker or Jack Leiter just doesn't look great. So I think it's entirely possible, maybe even likely, that that's the case. It's just, I don't know. If they're good enough, I don't think Patrick Corbin's going to take the job from them. You know, I do think they have a chance to run away with it. It's just, they may not.
All right. Before we hit our first break, just a reminder, this is your last chance to get in our FBT Bracket Challenge. The tournament starts today when you are listening at noon Eastern Time. Enter the Bracket Challenge for the chance to win a new Nissan Armada and trips to the 2026 Final Four. You can also play in men's and women's pools with friends and join our FBT pool. If you were in it last year, you're automatically in again. Just make your picks. If you want to join the bracket game, go to cbssports.com/baseball. You can also find the link in the episode description. The winner of our FBT bracket will get a 1-year subscription to Paramount Plus for free. Get the CBS Sports app to start filling out your brackets. No purchase necessary. See terms and rules for details. Let's take a break, and we'll be back right after this quick commercial break.
Guys, can you feel it? Legends were born here. History was made here. These are hallowed grounds.
Hallowed grounds? The NCIS squad room?
Well, I wasn't talking about that, but I was talking about Augusta National.
All right. It's finally time for the Masters. I hear it's a tradition unlike any other.
Welcome back in. Let's quickly run through some standouts from Wednesday's action. Spencer Schwellenbach. 6 shutout innings with 10 strikeouts against a mix of Yankees starters and backups. He had 21 whiffs on 78 pitches, 8 of those on the slider. This dude is a stud. I am so excited for Spencer Schwellenbach.
8 of those on the slider and multiple swinging strikes on 4 other pitches. So yeah, he's looked great this spring. We liked him coming in. Of course, there was the fear just because he came on so suddenly last year that there would be some regression. Doesn't look like it. Schwellenbach looks like he might just live up to all the hype.
This weekend, it will be very interesting to see where those 2 Braves starters go. Schwellenbach and Spencer Strider. I think the helium is going to get crazy this weekend. Jacob deGrom threw 4 innings, 2 runs, 3 strikeouts. His fastball averaged 95.5 miles per hour, down almost 2 miles per hour compared to where it was last year, which was already down from a couple of years ago. So I understand he wants to throw with less velocity, but this is a lot less velocity. We're talking like 3-4 miles per hour less on his fastball. So that will be something to watch.
Can I just, you guys don't actually think Spencer Schwellenbach should be moving up, right?
I don't, but people will see this.
No, I'm just making sure, because like I get that people might, but we know, like, there's nothing new here. He got a lot of whiffs last year. He was very good.
I agree. I moved him up my rankings personally a couple of days ago just because I want to give myself an opportunity. And he's going higher than I would like in a lot of drafts. So
you moved him up to 20th at starting pitcher, Frank. You've got him ahead of Bailey Ober and Bryce Miller.
All the way in.
And Max Fried.
Yep.
That's so he already did move him up, Chris, it seems like.
Well, and that like moving him up to make sure you draft him, I think is fine. I'm talking more about, oh my goodness, he had 10 strikeouts in 6 innings against a mixture of Yankees starters and minor leaguers. Like that would be not great process.
It's just a great start, and I felt like
it's more the under the hood stats,
right? But we knew. But like what I'm saying is like this is not an example of us learning something new about Spencer Schwellen.
No, but I feel like the original ranking had to safeguard against the possibility that he was just too good to be true last year. And I think not just this start, but everything he's shown this spring would suggest, nope, he's exactly as good as he looks last year.
Yeah, so if you needed one extra push to draft Spencer Schwellenbach, maybe that was it. Gavin Williams, 4 1/3, 3 runs, 5 strikeouts, 11 whiffs on 80 pitches, but a lot of hard contact, 93.2 mile per hour average exit velocity, and his fastball was down a touch from last year after being up earlier in spring. So, Scott, what do you think? Is the enthusiasm waning a little bit on Gavin Williams?
No, I checked. Chris and I were conferring about this before the show. The induced vertical break on Gavin Williams, 17 inches. That's the number you want to see. He got a ton of whiffs on the curveball this time instead of the fastball. The effectiveness of the fastball is what has excited me most about Gavin Williams. But the shape was still there. Velocity down a little. We've seen velocity down for a lot of pitchers this last turn. He was stretching to 80 pitches, Gavin Williams did in this start, which is a lot. But overall, he was effective. He allowed a 2-run homer. Otherwise, he was very effective.
All right, I'm just going to run through the rest of these, and if you want to touch on any of them afterwards, feel free. Jordan Hicks, 5 2/3, 1 run, 3 strikeouts, 0 walks. Sinker velocity up 2.9 miles per hour. Splitter was up almost 4 miles per hour in this one. Maybe feeling a little bit of pressure from Hayden Birdsong and Landon Rupp there. David Peterson, 5 shutout innings with 4 strikeouts. He's a name we haven't really talked about, but he's had a great spring. 15 2/3 shutout with 12 strikeouts. That's after ending last season very strong. Carlos Carrasco, sorry, Chris, just going to bring it up. 5 shutout with 3 strikeouts, only 3 whiffs on 54 pitches. No StatCast for Shane Smith of the White Sox, but he threw 4 shutout innings with 2 strikeouts in a revenge game against the Brewers. Cam Smith added again, 2 for 4 with his 4th home run. Ben Rice added again, hit another home run. This one, 110.3 exit velocity. And Victor Scott added again, 3rd home run of the spring.
I'm getting Victor Scott.
Yeah, that's surprising. I'm not sure if that's a fake out with the power there for Victor Scott, but I am getting pretty excited about Ben Rice. I have to say, who was a world beater in the minors. It's worth noting. I'm not sure we talked about that. His numbers there were ridiculous the past 2 seasons. And look, his expected stats were pretty solid last year. I know he hit like 170, but the expected batting average was closer to 240. The expected slug was like 460.
Yeah, expected was 340, I think, which is a well above average mark.
Left-handed hitter who knows how to elevate and pull the ball, playing half his games at Yankee Stadium. I'm not sure how high to put him in the first base rankings. You got to factor in the likelihood of him sitting against lefties. So I have him behind. I have him further down than I want him to, but it's one of those situations where you could make the argument to put him ahead of Andrew Vaughn, for instance.
Sure.
Or Jeimer Candelario.
Here's one. Would you rather have him or Spencer Torkelson or Tyler Soderstrom? Who would you rather have of those 3?
I would take Rice last of the 3.
I have Rice right in between the 2. We don't actually know that Torkelson has a job, right?
No,
so
we don't.
He's last of the 3 for me.
I think it's pretty likely he's going to be their DH to open the season.
I mean, he's played like right field, right?
Yeah, they've been trying to acclimate him to right.
So yeah, I think there's a chance, or a very good chance that he's on the roster. I don't know if he's going to be an everyday player, but I'm not sure any of those guys are going to be everyday players anyway. Yeah. I did do my bold predictions for every team yesterday, and my bold prediction for the Yankees, Ben Rhys is second on the team in homers.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm going to move Torkelson up.
Spicy.
I'm moving them. I'm moving them to 28, 29, and 30 with Soderstrom, Rhys, and Torkelson in that order at first base. So like, these are still reserve round picks, but I think they're pretty interesting. It's
difficult to juggle the in a shallow, the purely deep league options like Luke Raley and Josh Bell, who obviously we wouldn't go for a 12-team league, but anything deeper than that, you have to give them preferential treatment to the guys you really don't know what they're going to do, and so that's the difficulty in ranking Rhys and Torkelson.
Yep.
Do you guys have anything on Shane Smith, Carrasco, David Peterson, Jordan Hicks?
Smith, Hicks, and Carrasco are all just, Peterson, Carrasco, and Hicks, I think, are all just streamers. I have a little bit of hope Shane Smith can be there, but I'll admit it's very much just he hasn't proven he's just a streamer yet. But whatever, if they have good matchups early in the season, they might be worth a reserve round pick, but I would much rather take a chance on any of the late round guys we've talked about over the course of the last few weeks. Max Meyer, Richard Fitz, any of those guys who are like seeing a velocity jump this season or this spring, have a new pitch, something like that, just in case, because there will be David Petersons available on waivers. I'm not worried about like missing the boat on David Peterson or Jordan Hicks, right?
All right, we got the 2-game series between the Dodgers and the Cubs in the books. In game 1, Yamamoto against Imanaga both looked pretty good. Yamamoto 5 innings, 1 run, 4 strikeouts. Imanaga's control was shaky, 4 walks, but he threw 4 no-hit innings with 2 strikeouts. Tanner Scott got the save in that first game. In game 2, neither Roki Sasaki nor Justin Steele was good. Sasaki 3 innings, 1 hit, 1 run, 5 walks to 3 strikeouts. He did average 98 miles per hour on his fastball. He topped out at just over 100. Justin Steele, 4 innings, 5 runs, 2 homers allowed in that one. Ohtani homered because, of course, he did. And then it was Alex Vesia who got the save in the 9th inning. I guess they don't want to work Tanner Scott back-to-back days here in just a 2-game series. And Kirby Yates pitched in the 8th, facing 6, 7, and 8 in the Cubs lineup. Alex Vesia faced the top of the lineup. So just thought it was a little bit interesting. Any thoughts on the 2-game series?
Yeah, that was weird with the bullpen usage. For what it's worth, Kirby Yates, 8 whiffs on 21
looked
pitches.
Unbelievably good.
So he looks like he's going to pick up where he left off last year. And if that happens, he's going to be the number 2 option for saves, despite the weird usage in this one. I don't worry about Tanner Scott not doing it. I think just he's not ready to go back-to-back days yet. Makes sense. It's mid-March. And don't put too much stock in Alex Vesia. He's a fine middle reliever, but I don't think he's going to get many saves.
Yeah. I wouldn't put too much into the usage in any of these games, right? Like they count, but I think for all intents and purposes, they're exhibition games, right? Like we saw Michael Conforto wasn't in the original lineup. Kike Hernandez played first base today. Like I don't want to draw too many conclusions. That being said, the last 2 Roki Sasaki starts have been very underwhelming and have highlighted a lot of the concerns that I have with him, which one, I think in this one, the command was so bad that's probably not going to be a consistent issue for him.
I wonder if he was overthrowing to get it up to 98. Yeah. And because, that's clearly on his mind. When he was marketing himself to teams, he was asking them, how can I get my fastball back?
Yep.
And it wasn't there in his most recent spring start.
It's, it's a big moment. His MLB debut coming in Tokyo in front of a Japanese crowd. Like that's a big moment. So like him being amped up, that would make sense. I don't want to hold it against him too much. but he threw one splitter in the strike zone. And I know splitters are generally chase pitches that you're trying to throw out of the strike zone, but like I looked at Kevin Gausman, Shodi Managa, and who's another guy who throws a splitter a lot. I looked at three of them, like the three highest. Oh, Yamamoto. And their splitter usage, their splitter zone rates last year were between 30 and 40%. So like a 7% zone rate is especially poor, even though you're generally throwing it. And like his splitter is so weird with like 500 RPMs of spin. It kind of is a knuckleball in some ways for him. With, half the time it goes glove side, half the time it goes arm side. I just think command might be a problem. I've been down on him, but I kind of like just kept him around 35 in the rankings, and his season's already started, and it might seem like me overreacting to one poor start. I kind of wish I had just put him at like 50 at starting pitcher, because I just don't really think the upside's going to be there.
The ADP is still very high. Over the past week at the NFBC, 92.2 for Sasaki. That's ahead of Bailey Ober, Max Fried, Aaron Nola, Hunter Green, Tanner Bybee, Logan Webb.
Because all of those guys have, well, not all of them, but a bunch of those guys either have really high per inning upside, but questions about their workload. Like Tyler Glasnow is going in that range or a little ahead of him. Hunter Green, like you mentioned, or they're really safe, projectable arms who are going to get 80, 70 more innings than Roki Sasaki. So yeah, I wish I had
none of us rank him that high.
No, I wish I had the courage to rank him lower.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything else on 2-game series, or good to move on?
Let's go. Got a lot of players to talk about here.
That's right. Players we haven't talked enough about. And I surveyed the good people of Twitter, X, and I asked which players do you want to hear about? And I got so many responses. Thank you. And I think I wrote, 30 names on this rundown. We're not going to get to all of them, but we'll try our best. Let's start with Josh Young, who had the strong 2023, continuously deals with injuries to his right wrist. He had surgery in April of last year, and then he had another surgery on that same wrist in October. Not really having the best spring, 15 strikeouts in 45 at-bats. Chris, I feel like in the past, this is someone that you have liked as an undervalued target. What do you think about right now on Josh Young? I think the ADP is right around 200. This
is someone throughout the process, there's just been a nagging thing in the back of my mind. Like, shouldn't you be higher on him? Because when he was healthy in 2023, he was on a 30 homer, 100 RBI, like 95 run pace. He was having a really good year. And then at the end of the year, 2 years ago, 2023, he got hit by a pitch. I think it fractured his wrist. He's just dealt with a ton of injuries, but it's been a lot of like broken bones. At least two of the most serious injuries, and possibly a third one in the minors.
He had a torn labrum in his shoulder a couple of years ago.
Yeah, that was the one that derailed the start of his major league career. And he is 27, so he's not like super young. So
No, he's Josh Young.
No, he is. Well, he's the better young. So relatively speaking, he is super young. But yeah, I do still think there's 30 homer upside here in a really good lineup. And the cost is so cheap that there have been times, including tonight, where I was down to my corner infield spot. And the only problem tonight was Michael Toglia was available. And you guys know I love him. I rank him a lot higher. So that was why I went with Toglia. But if not, I would have taken Young. If Toglia had gone earlier, I would have taken Young.
I'm on the opposite side with you on Young. I think he raised questions about performance for the first time last year, in addition to not being able to stay healthy. And he's a really bad plate discipline guy, which always makes for a much lower floor than a good plate discipline guy. And I just find if I need a corner infielder at that point, I'm just waiting for somebody else to take him so I can look at some of the options that come later.
In fairness, he was 3 for 8 with a home run. Or no, sorry, he had 2 home runs in his first 3 games last year, or first 4 games last year. And then he got hurt. He had a wrist injury and didn't play again until July. So
It's just
you're
if
gonna
I'm,
have
if I'm waiting for
performance
you to prove it
issues-
over and over again, and it
But he
keeps
did
getting
prove it.
worse.
But he did prove it. Like he was really good in 20.
2 years ago.
Yeah. I think if
two
you're ever
surgeries
going,
later.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
I get it. I just think if you're ever going to give someone a pass for performance concerns, a bunch of fractures in your hand and wrist over the course of 8-month span would be a pretty good explanation.
Well, we got another corner infielder coming up here that goes later and that I like more and that I think is much more proven. Can I just say the name, Frank?
Yes, you certainly can.
Rhys Hoskins. Rhys
Thought about
Hoskins is somebody that I've moved way up this spring.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is a guy who prior to last year, really for his entire career in Philadelphia, he was a mid-round target, even in shallower leagues. He was somebody you'd he wasn't a top tier first baseman, but he was somebody you'd always be satisfied as your starter at first base. Safe bet for 30 homers and a not so bad batting average, and points leagues he gave you walks and very consistent in that regard. First year in Milwaukee didn't go so well, and he wasn't even an everyday player by the end. And so my initial ranking for Rhys Hoskins, not knowing what the next stage of his career looked like, I had him buried. But then he's come back this spring. He's looked amazing. 6 home runs in 11 games. The plate discipline's been great. And it gets you thinking, okay, remember Ronald Acuna's first year back from a torn ACL. His power kind of suffered too. It's not something that players just return from seamlessly. Maybe Hoskins just needed more time to feel 100%. And he looks 100% now. Certainly has a clear path to playing time with the Brewers. Why couldn't he resume who he was in Philadelphia? So he goes in over the weekend. He was going about 235 in NFBC drafts. I think it's great value. He is if I get burned at first base, I wouldn't feel so terrible about having him as my starter there. Let me put it this way, I guess. Ryan Mountcastle's kind of been my go-to cheap corner infield option in roto leagues, but I find more in drafts as time goes on. I'm willing to pass up Mountcastle where he goes because I know Rhys Hoskins and also Max Muncy, for that matter, I'll lump him in there too, are available later. Both of them are another reason why I just can't get excited about Josh Young for what it's worth.
That's exactly the point I was going to make. Josh Young is going around 200, and you got Rhys Hoskins and Ryan Mountcastle going 30, 40 picks after that. And even some other serviceable corner infielders that are going even later. So I just don't ever really feel the need to go in and take Josh Young. I can see how it works out. He's 27 years old. He's in the middle of a really good Rangers lineup, but there is injury risk, and it just doesn't feel worth it where Josh Young is going right now. Garrett Mitchell is a name that I would like to talk about. He is a former top 100 prospect who's dealt with some injuries, a left shoulder subluxation in 2023, a fractured finger last year, but in 69 games, he hit 255 with 8 home runs, 11 steals in 812 OPS. He definitely has his warts. He strikes out a lot. I get that. I'm intrigued here, Scott. Expected to back cleanup, play every day, 95th percentile sprint speed, and I'll let you in on a little secret. Garrett Mitchell visited Driveline this offseason. Zach Moraine is a listener of this podcast who works at Driveline, and he sent me an email this offseason, and he told me Mitchell went there to work on his bat speed and launch angle.
He needs a lot of work on both.
I am intrigued by Garrett Mitchell.
Yeah, I mean, I wish that the results of that work showed a little more in his spring stats. He's homered once in 41 plate appearances. It's a small sample. It doesn't necessarily mean he hasn't learned to tap into his power more, but the exit velocities are middling for Garrett Mitchell. You said the strikeout rate is high. The strikeout rate is horrendous.
Really high.
Like 32% last year. That was his career best as a major leaguer. And you got to be like massive power hitter to overcome a strikeout rate that high. It doesn't look any better this spring for what it's worth. 16 strikeouts and 41 plate appearances. Same old there. For Garrett Mitchell, he's fast, but he gets hurt a lot. And I think that stolen base category, I mean, even for as fast as he is, he hasn't always been, I guess, 11 steals and He's kind of like a 30 steal pace last year. So yeah, I guess you could draft him expecting steals. I don't know what else you can expect though, and I don't know how long he'll stay healthy. And if he hits as poorly as I think he might, I don't know how long he'll stay in the lineup.
I also just he went to Driveline to work on his bat speed.
And launch.
Might be true, but that doesn't mean it's going to work. Like we see this every off season. Ty France went to Driveline and worked on his bat speed last year, and
it's true.
This is Austin Hayes we were talking about recently. Someone reworked their swing and they had to go back. Brandon Drury went to one of the
Ty France says he's reverting this year.
Yeah,
it didn't work last year.
And not to pull that one specific, because there are a bunch of off-season places where these are professionals making hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars a year with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake in potential future earnings. Of course, they're working out in the offseason. It would be newsworthy if a player didn't spend some time in some kind of garage or warehouse working with high-tech equipment. So it's just, I think I'm just not going to give the benefit of the doubt for that kind of thing.
You got to see the results of that work for it to mean anything.
Yeah.
I do think there is a little bit more playing time upside here because the Brewers just don't really have much depth. Even if you look at their farm system, their bench is bad. Their farm system, they don't really have outfielders. So I think there's a pretty long leash here for Garrett Mitchell. I totally understand the strikeouts, but he's going the ADP is 270. He's a 68th.
Right. It's a fine dice roll.
I think there's a chance he goes 20-20 this year and he's hitting in the middle of an okay Brewers lineup. Yeah. I got a lot of requests for Spencer Arrighetti, who we spoke about a lot earlier in the offseason, and then we just kind of stopped. So I guess let's talk about him again because he was a breakout for each of us. He's also walking everybody this spring. So,
that's the last thing you want to see. It is spring, so I don't want to pay much attention to it, but because that is the single biggest thing that could sink Arrighetti, it's hard not to notice it. And maybe it'll be gone by the time the regular season starts. I mean, spring training's for getting ready, so I think mainly what's happened, why he's gone from being an industry darling to kind of this afterthought, is just other pitchers have taken our attention away from him. They've dazzled this spring and forced us to look into them more and forced us to talk about them more. While Arrighetti's just, he's walked some guys and he's kind of just plodded along. So he's been overshadowed this spring and has kind of gotten pushed down in terms of hype because of it. But to renew the hype, final 10 appearances last year, Spencer Arrighetti had a 2.72 ERA, 117 WHIP, 11.4 K per nine. His secondary arsenal gets a lot of whiffs if he doesn't lean on the fastball too much, and if he throws enough strikes, there's a potential for him to be an impact pitcher this year.
Yep.
And I haven't lowered him in my rankings based on the walks. Yeah,
I haven't seen much StatCast data on him this spring. But yeah, I'm not moving him down because he has 9 walks in 14 innings. It's too small of a sample size, and what we don't know is he working on something? Maybe, and that could just explain it. And if that's the case, then it really wouldn't be anything to be concerned about at all. So he's not fighting for a rotation spot. So I'm not going to put too much of an onus on results here.
What he should be working on, Chris, is throwing strikes. It's 12 walks and 12 1/3.
It's bad. Yeah, that's bad.
That's a lot. The ADP for Spencer Arrighetti is 200.5. He's the SP 58. Would you guys rather have Arrighetti or spring riser Gavin Williams?
Arrighetti.
Well, Gavin Williams is my favorite spring riser, so I'm going to say Gavin Williams.
What about Arrighetti or Scott's second favorite riser, Clay Holmes?
Arrighetti for me, but probably Holmes for Scott.
I have moved Clay Holmes into the good glob. So yeah, Holmes.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we will talk about more players right after this commercial break.
Brackets are back. Play CBS Sports bracket games for a chance to win a new SUV and a trip to the 2026 Final Four. Get the CBS Sports app now to play.
Welcome back in Fantasy Baseball today. Players we haven't talked enough about. Christian Encarnaion-Strand. His ADP entering last year was 132. Many had him pegged as a breakout, and then he suffered a fracture in his wrist. He underwent surgery in June. I had some pretty big questions about playing time entering spring training, but with the Spencer Steer injury, it looks like CES will have a pretty fair opportunity early on in the season.
But maybe not, right? Like, if Steer is able to play, he's almost certainly not going to be able to play the outfield. And so that probably means he's just a first baseman or DH, which, well, those are Christian Encarnaion-Strand's two positions. And there could still be enough opportunities for both of them. It could just be one plays DH and one plays first base, and that's just the everyday configuration.
Both are playable at third base too. Encarnaion-Strand and Candelario. I mean, probably not Steer.
Yeah. But Encarnaion-Strand really hasn't played very much first base in the majors, has he?
Third base, you mean?
Third base, yeah.
No, but that was his primary position in the minors, and they've said this spring in some fashion that they still consider him an option there.
Here's the problem, though. Isn't that Gavin Lux's primary position?
Yeah, I don't know that I believe in Gavin Lux. Maybe they do, but
I mean, they traded for him.
Yeah, but they've called him a utility player,
right? But it just, if Spencer Steer is limited, if he's on the IL, then yeah, CES, I think he's a viable late round pick. It's just, if Spencer Steer is able to play, but only able to play first base, it gets really tricky. So I do have CS. I think he was in my original sleepers column. I like him. I think there is an opportunity there. It's just, even a best case scenario may just be a part-time player.
The biggest issue with Encarnaion-Strand for me is, remember how we were just talking about Rhys Hoskins, and I'll put Max Muncy in there too. Well, they're going more in the 230 range. Yeah. Encarnaion-Strand is like 210, and I don't have nearly as much confidence in him as those going behind him.
All right, let's move on to Shea Langeliers, who last season improved across the board, and he did so with his plate discipline, batting average, home runs, RBI, OPS. Kind of feels like 80% of Cal Raleigh. Maybe some untapped potential because his career numbers on the road outside of Oakland Coliseum are much better than they were at home, and now playing in Sacramento. The ADP is 154 as the 8th catcher off the board. I don't typically target him or Raleigh just because of the batting average. What about you guys on Shea Langeliers?
I got him for $5 in the auction I did tonight, and I think that was the first time I've drafted him. So I'm with you on usually not drafting him, but there's plenty of power, and the underlying numbers are quite good. If I was going for this version of a catcher, the low batting average, hoping for 25 homers, I'd rather have him than Logan O'Hoppe, who goes in a very similar range of the draft.
And I'll note, has looked terrible this spring. Again, I don't want to make too much of spring stats, but the way he's looked terrible is 15 strikeouts and 33 plate appearances. Even over a small sample, that's alarming.
In his case,
Logan O'Hoppe, right?
Yeah, Logan O'Hoppe.
And in his case, they're starting over the last week. Logan O'Hoppe does seem to be getting pushed down a little bit. They're about 20 spots in ADP apart. But yeah, I just think Langeliers tends to go in a part of the draft that I'm just not really looking. Like it's 106 over the past week at NFBC. He probably goes a little later in most other drafts, but it's still like, I kind of don't want to be in the middle at catcher. I either want to go early or late. And so he tends to just get kind of pushed down. Plus, I'd just rather have JT Realmuto than him, and he goes about 2 rounds later.
I think it's slightly more likely Langeliers is better than last year than worse, but I don't think there's enormous upside. I don't think we're talking about him as a top 5 catcher next year.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably approaching 30 home runs and like a 230 to 240 batting average is, him continuing to improve this season. Heliot Ramos of the Giants, another former top 100 prospect, finally got a chance last year, and he took advantage of it. Hit 269, 22 homers, 6 steals, 792 OPS, legit power metrics, but he took a step back in the second half. Huge left-right splits, 1189 OPS against lefties, 673 OPS against righties. Scott, any chance that we are sleeping on Heliot Ramos right now? ADP right around 200.
I mean, that's not my view on him. And I feel like when we have, because we have talked about it before, but when we have, I got the impression you were both more optimistic about Heliot Ramos than I am. Exit velocities are good. Plate discipline is pretty bad. And the fact he sank in the second half, the fact he has troubles against righties, which are what he's going to be facing more, the fact he plays in a bad park, I'll make him underwhelming to me. And it's sort of like I've been saying at corner infield. There's outfielders I like more that are going later. I mean, somebody who was just part of the Giants outfield last year, Michael Conforto, even with hints of him maybe sometimes sitting against lefties for the Dodgers. I like that situation a lot more than I like Ramos's. So part of the reason we haven't talked about him much, I guess, is because I have, at cost, virtually no interest in drafting him.
I will just point out, regarding the struggles against righties, they were real. The underlying numbers back it up. But he did have a 180 expected ISO, which is expected slug minus expected average. And so the problem is it was a 229 expected average. And if that's his true talent level, that's a problem. But if it was more like 250 and you could push that slugging percentage to like 440 to 450 against righties, I think the whole profile plays up really nicely. So I do think he's not far from being a pretty good hitter. I just agree with Scott on there being more players I like in that range.
80 spots later for Conforto over the weekend.
Yeah. I would rather take Soler straight up over him, and I think Soler goes later as well.
He goes about a round later than Ramos on average. Yeah.
Nate Lowe, the question I received: why are there 100 picks between him and Vinny P?
Baby. I think Lowe is underrated. I think the Rangers just straight up downgraded in effectively trading him for Jake Burger. I know Jake Burger has the one loud standout skill, but I think Nathaniel Lowe's just a much better baseball player than Jake Burger. And I think it's weird that they didn't think that. The problem with Nate Lowe is he's a first baseman who's just not very interesting. Like, he's just kind of average at everything. Like, he is an average source of average. He's an average source of power. I think he could drive in 85 to 90 runs if that Nationals lineup, especially at the top, is good, because he makes a lot of contact. He's got a little bit of pop, but there's no real upside there. I think that's why he gets forgotten about and why we don't talk about him. I think there is something to be said for, is Vinny Pasquantino worth all the hype? I'm not sure I agree that he's not worth the hype, but this is definitely like, we got to see a low 800s OPS bat from Vinny P this year, or I think we just write him off as a Nate Lowe type player.
Yeah, at some point it's going to get there, and he's already 27. If he played anywhere other than Kansas City, and just looking at his expected home runs by ballpark, he'd have more everywhere. And he hasn't walked as much the past couple of years, Pasquantino. So that's supposed to be a big part of his skill set. It just feels like it hasn't all come together for him yet. And there's some external factors contributing to that. So it's an upside. It's an upside thing. Like, Vinny Pasquantino's baseline scenario feels kind of like Nate Lowe's best case scenario. But I do think Nate Lowe is like a prime NL only target. Like, in those really deep leagues, that's the kind of player I want to target. One who's not going to cost much, but who I trust is going to play a lot and just fill out categories in a boring way.
All right, let's try and do a little rapid fire, see how many names we can get to, because there are just so many here. Leighton Thomas, productive season for fantasy, much worse after joining the Guardians. Big left-right splits in his career, favoring the left-handed pitchers. So maybe there's like a small chance he falls into a short side platoon. Leighton Thomas, anybody?
He's just not very good.
Like,
I mean, he had 32 steals last year.
He'll steal some bases, but I think he gets drafted way higher than guys like Cedric Mullins, and I just don't really think he's better than them.
40 picks ahead of Cedric Mullins.
Yeah. Is he as good as Cedric Mullins? 237, 15 homers, 32 steals for Leighton Thomas last year.
That's not far from what Cedric Mullins did.
Yeah.
It is basically in line with what Cedric Mullins did. But is Leighton Thomas at least that good, is what I'm saying.
So the problem is he stopped stealing when he got to Cleveland. And the only thing that kept him afloat was 7 home runs in 53 games. I don't think he's a 20-plus homer guy. I know he hit 28 in 2023. But yeah, I think there's some real downside risk for Leighton Thomas just not being useful.
If he loses the steals, and he only has 1 steal this spring, how much would a veteran try to steal in spring training? That's a fair question. But I'd feel better if he had like 4 steals this spring, you know?
Yeah.
Well, next up is Cedric Mullins, who we were just talking about. He has 30-plus steals in 3 of the past 4 years. Got off to a slow start, much better in the second half. He was awful against lefties, and they brought in Ramon Laureano. I think there's a good chance that Mullins is just a strong side platoon player. But even with that, I think he's still going to give you 25 to 30 steals. And
he'll probably give you a much better batting average if he's a strong side platoon player. I love getting Cedric Mullins as if I need stolen bases and I need steals and a 5-out. I'm sorry, that's the same thing. If I need stolen bases and I need outfielders, which is often the case in a standard roto league, Mullins is the guy I'm looking at. He goes after pick 200 on average. I find that never happens in my drafts. I would like it to, because I would like to be able to take Mullins with that. His batting average was also impacted by a horrendous start last year. Over his final 87 games, he hit 277 with an 834 OPS. And maybe you can expect something closer to that if he's not playing against left-handers as much. 15 homers, 30 steals. Yeah, I'll take that outside of pick 200.
And again, that was Cedric Mullins. Next up, Luis Rengifo. Who is the real Rengifo? In 2022 and 2023, he was virtually the same player, 260-ish, 16, 17 homers, handful of steals. Then last year under Ron Washington, completely changed the profile, opting for more line drives and ground balls, 24 steals in 78 games. That is a 50 steal pace. Chris, who is the real Luis Rengifo?
I think he's probably a 265 hitter with very little power, especially after the changes he made last season. But I do think the speed might be legitimate. Maybe not. He was on nearly a 50 steal pace. And even at his best, I don't think he had that kind of foot speed. But Ron Washington's super aggressive on the base path. So I do think there's a chance Luis Rengifo is a 30 steal guy. And if he hits 10 homers and hits 265 and probably hits near the top of the lineup, I think you're talking about a very good fantasy option. So if he wasn't dealing with this, it's a hamstring injury this spring, right?
Yes, but he's been back playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he'd be going even higher. And I think, originally I think I had him in like the 150-ish range of the rankings, and I moved him down since then. But I think there's a decent chance that he's a must-start player in categories leagues.
Again, that was Luis Rengifo. Next up is Matt Wallner, who hits the ball as hard as anybody. 92.8 average exit velocity, 17.5% barrel rate. He also had a 36% strikeout rate and will not play against lefties. The ADP is around 275. Scott, any interest in Matt Wallner?
I remain skeptical of Wallner, and I admit if you just look at the top line numbers, 2024, 2023, both years he hit between 250 and 260, OPS in the high 800s because he walks a lot too, but that strikeout rate is so high. And I feel like I feel like when you actually dig into the game logs each of those years, you'll find that if like the season kind of ended with him at his hottest, like he didn't have a chance to cool down. And I don't think we've gotten a proper accounting for what his numbers, again, 36% strikeout rate. You gotta be a killer, an absolute killer to navigate that. So I don't know. I may be overcomplicating it. I'll admit we don't have a huge sample. Basically, we have between 3 years in the majors, a single season's worth of stats for Wallner. The fact he's not going to play against lefties. Yeah, as a cheap enough source of power, I'm fine with it. He's going about 250th over the last weekend, which is beyond the Rhys Hoskins and Max Muncy's of the world. So it's fine. It's just not something I'm like. It's not something I'm building my draft around. Oh, I got to get Matt Wallner late as my sneaky power source.
Can I give you one reason to be excited in daily lineups leagues?
Sure.
It sounds like. Thank you for answering. It was a rhetorical question. It sounds like he's the leadoff hitter for the Twins against right-handed pitching.
Yeah.
That's
totally,
pretty exciting.
Totally see it in daily lineup. Yeah.
I think it's probably just daily lineups and leagues where you have that option to bench someone on Friday, just because then you can manipulate his playing time a little more. But in just a weekly category or roto league, and especially points, he's probably pretty fringe.
He didn't end last year at his absolute hottest, I'll point out, but he also didn't get a ton of time in the majors to kind of let those stats normalize. That's the main thing with Wallner for me. I don't think we've seen the stats normalize just because his seasons have been chopped up so much.
Again, that was Matt Wallner. Ronel Blanco, out of nowhere breakout at 31 years old, 2.80 ERA, 109 WHIP. That came with a 4.15 FIP and a 3.97 xERA. Also, lots of walks. Chris, you were skeptical all of last year. Do you remain skeptical?
Yeah. I think he's a 4 ERA pitcher with a bad WHIP who isn't going to give you a lot of strikeouts. He can be useful, but I just don't see much reason to be excited about him at all. Like, where does he go relative? Like, he goes around Tanner Houck. That's probably fine, but we haven't talked about Tanner Houck this year either.
We did just talk about him yesterday, but we haven't talked about him much.
You know what I meant. But it's just in that, right? Like, we haven't talked very much about Jose Barrios. We haven't talked very much about, there are just more interesting pitchers in the same range or later that I'm always going to take the flyer on. There was a point in my auction tonight where I had one pitcher spot left. He was sitting there for $2, and I could have done it for $2. I think he's worth $2 or $3, but Jackson Jobe was still available, and Nick Lodolo was still available, and so it's really easy for that guy to get lost in the mix because I just don't think there's much upside.
All right, I'm going to go really rapid fire here. 15 seconds a player. Let's go.
All right. Well, we've got some higher end players. Logan Webb, Scott. Any thoughts on Logan Webb?
Love the way the cutters look this spring. It might make him a better strikeout pitcher, and I'm getting excited to take him as my number 2.
All right. Pablo Lopez. We kind of talked about him a little bit yesterday, but haven't talked about him too much this offseason.
You're going to get a lot of strikeouts. You're going to get an ERA that is useful but not great. Ride the roller coaster. And you know that there are highs and lows with Pablo Lopez. If you can't do that, if you're going to come on here after he has a 5 ERA after 4 starts and say Pablo Lopez is terrible, I'm going to drop him, just don't draft him because it's probably going to happen at some point.
I got to interject because he was in the article I wrote, the 12 players I'm looking to avoid. He kind of lost his sweeper last year that made him such a big strikeout guy 2 years ago. And I don't feel like it's looked better this spring.
Tanner Bybee, can he take another step?
Maybe, but I'm not counting on it. I think if you just take his numbers at face value, he's perfectly fine where he's going. 3.25 ERA, 1.14 WHIP for his career. I think he's a fine rotation stabilizer with maybe a slight amount of untapped upside.
Dansby Swanson kind of feels like an undervalued target, at least for me. Do any of you guys agree?
Yeah, he was playing through a core muscle injury. He finally had surgery on it at the end of last season. Hopefully that explains why he was so underwhelming for most of last season. It's weird that as he was playing through the injury, he had this really good second half, and he was running more. But yeah, I think he's a perfectly fine middle infielder at a value.
Tyler O'Neill, 31 homers in 113 games last season, signed with the Orioles this offseason. Lots of power, lots of injuries, lots of strikeouts.
Move on to the next player.
Well,
that's the Tyler O'Neill experience.
It's more complicated than that because he did strike out 34% of the time last year and was great. Normally he strikes out like 25, 26% of the time. And it doesn't always go great. So I don't know how to reconcile all of that. It's not like he's always a 30+% strikeout guy, but we know there's a lot of raw power there. If he can stay healthy, he's not going to suffer from the left field fence thing in Baltimore because they moved him in. Baltimore, a team that knows a lot about hitting, went out and got him. I think he's kind of undervalued. I do worry about the strikeout rate, but obviously he managed to succeed in spite of it last year, and it's not always a thing for O'Neill.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Busch, I like what he did last year, 335 on base percentage, 21 home runs, and then they signed Justin Turner.
Yeah, it just seems like it's probably going to be 550 plate appearances rather than 650 plate appearances, and which means that there are going to be times when he gets cold and isn't playing every day and you're really frustrated with him, but he goes late enough where as a power-oriented corner infielder, I think he's fine. The problem is he had 8 homers in the first 30 games or something last year, and I only ended up with 21.
But his strikeout rate got better.
Yeah.
Michael Busch. He is a low-key breakout for me. I don't have a good enough justification to really trumpet Michael Busch loudly as a breakout, but he...
Just because you've loved him forever, Scott.
I've loved him forever. He killed it this spring. I noticed throughout his minor league career when he first got to a level, it was kind of underwhelming for a while, and then he'd take off and look like the best player in the league. So I just wonder if we're going to see a lesser version of that in his second major league season.
Ryan Pepio, very solid first season with the Rays, 3.60 ERA, 115 whip, 9.8 K per 9, strong skills, good whiffs, but he's now pitching in George Steinbrenner Field. He's a fly ball pitcher who ranked 22nd percentile in barrel rate last season.
And go ahead.
Well, I'm surprised somebody thought we don't talk enough about Ryan Pepio, because every time we talk about busts, I bring him up. I think he is one of the clearest bust candidates as a fly ball homer prone pitcher in what should be a terrible place for that kind of pitcher this year.
I will just point out, if he can sustain the giant whiff rate on his four-seamer last year, it was 31%, and the changeup gets better, that was supposed to be his best pitch coming up as a prospect, I do still think there is some breakout potential here. The problem is how much of the elite whiff rate on the four-seamer came from pitching at Tropicana Field. I don't know. He was better on the road last year, for what it's worth. But yeah, that's the main thing. I was ready to call Pepio a breakout this year, if not for the change in venue.
You take this next one, Chris. I know this is one of your guys, Zach Eflin.
Zach Eflin. Any thoughts, Chris? Is he one of your guys? Because you looked confused.
I don't know if Eflin's... I draft him a lot. I'm putting together...
Twisted our arm to get him in our shared venture.
Well, because we were worried about whip, and he's consistently a very good whip pitcher. And even when he's not pitching like an ace like he did in 2023, he tends to be a pretty bad source of strikeouts, but a very good source of whip. Last year it was 115. And it was specifically what usually happens is if I'm at the point in the draft where Zach Eflin's near the top of the queue and I need whip, I take Zach Eflin. And I think I've drafted him 4 or 5 times already on the 10 teams that I've drafted that I'm playing out.
Why?
It's never like a huge priority, but his skill set works.
Why is Eflin going ahead of Eovaldi? I don't really understand that.
To me, they are the same pitcher.
Eovaldi gets more strikeouts, though.
That's
not a
true.
huge strikeout guy, but better than Eflin, with the exception of
last year. Yeah,
I guess they both have injury risk. I think Eovaldi's probably higher though.
Eflin doesn't have a ton of arm injury risk, right? His issues. Yeah, it was his knees. I think arm injuries are scarier for pitchers than knees. I could be wrong, but that would be the primary thing. But yeah, I think Eovaldi we also don't talk very much about, but I think he's also totally fine there.
Yeah. And we can put Jose Barrios in there too, mid-3 ZRA with a really solid whip and not terrible number of strikeouts. Barrios might like most of the three because he's the most durable.
Barrios' whip can be pretty bad though. His whip's not
usually 115 range.
It was 115 last year, 119 the year before, 142 the year before.
Yeah, that 1 year was obviously the outlier for his whole career, though.
Yeah. Rhys Olsen is kind of like Arrighetti. I think we all had him as a sleeper, and we spoke about him earlier in the offseason, and then we just kind of stopped. You guys still like Rhys Olsen?
Yeah, he's seen a little bit of a velocity jump this spring. It's been about a half a mile per hour, but you hope that can carry over into the regular games. He's throwing his sinker a little bit more in his starts, and that seems to be the key with Rhys Olsen. If once he gets to 2 strikes, his slider and changeup, if I'm remembering which 2 types of pitches he uses, are really good whiff pitches. I think they both had whiff rates over 40% last year. It's just that his 4-seamer gets absolutely destroyed at a 360 xwOBA last year. His sinker was 289. I would rather him just go sinker, keep the 4-seamer for the occasional lefty, but just try to get early contact or throw strikes and get to a point where he can get guys to chase with the slider and changeup. I think the path is there. It's just putting the right pieces together.
You skipped Matt McLean earlier, Frank. Did you do that on purpose?
I didn't. I was going to start jumping around to make sure that we finished, but if you want to talk about Matt McLean, you can.
Because he is one of the 12 players that I'm just basically never interested in drafting.
Yeah, he's a bust for me.
I don't feel like we really have any clue who he is. I mean, last year was critical to validate what he did the year before. In 2023, huge breakout at AAA, got to the majors and basically followed through on the breakthrough. But we're talking 50th percentile exit velocities, very mid. A strikeout rate approaching 29%. It actually got worse the longer he was up. And, it's really just that 1 year for his whole professional career, which hasn't been very long, granted, but it's really just that 1 year where McLean looked like world beater.
He hit like 230 at AA.
This spring, he's been kind of meh. Strikeout rate's been high. He's going to, I think over the weekend, 75th on average. He could live up to that. I think the upside is there, but I don't feel confident enough that we're even getting a startable player. Probably.
I think it's crazy. I think his price it might work out. I can see the upside. It's a very fantasy friendly skill set if it works, but if nothing else, is there another player in the top 100 being drafted who's had season ending injuries 2 years in a row?
He's now a top 80 pick in the past.
Yeah, like he had an oblique injury that ended his 2023 season. And okay, fine. Oblique injuries aren't that serious, except he got to spring training in 2024. I remember this and I looked it up recently and was not cleared to play for like the first 2 weeks of spring because of the oblique injury from the previous September. And then he has a shoulder surgery and a rib injury that ends his next season. And we're just like, cool, he's a top 80 pick. We love him. It'd be one thing if he had like no performance concerns and it was just injury. Then it's like, okay, fine. We're doing that with Christian Yelich, although he's significantly cheaper. We're doing it with Mike Trout, although again, he's significantly cheaper. But I think we're treating Matt McLean like he's just an obvious bet to be a superstar as long as he's out there. And I just don't think it's obvious.
All right, we have 7 names left, 15 seconds each. Riley Green improved last year, but it feels like maybe the upside is capped. He doesn't run and he plays in Detroit. What do you guys think?
I mean, that's basically it. I think what you see is what you get with him now. He's not going to be a base stealer. His power's capped in that park, and he strikes out too much to be a great source of batting average.
Remember when Nick Castellanos became like an elite fantasy player once he got out of Detroit? That's what I think is Riley Green.
All we need is Riley Green to Cincinnati. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Zach Geloff feels like he has a fantasy-friendly profile, power, speed, but he also strikes out 34% of the time.
What if Matt McLean struck out 34% of the time?
Instead of 29?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Colton Cowser, runner-up for the American League Rookie of the Year. This might just be a blind spot. I never looked to draft him. I don't know why.
I agree. I don't think I've added him to a queue yet. And I might be missing out because there's certainly upside there. There's raw power. There's athleticism. It's never the right point in the draft for him. Even though I don't rank him significantly lower than where he's going.
There is no way there's no way you could talk about this player in 15 seconds, but whoever wants to give it a try.
I'll do it. I'll read what I wrote about him in that article.
Luis
I've always been leery of Luis Robert due to his injury risk and poor plate discipline, but I'd go along at times in years past because the upside was so palpable. His failure last year was so complete, though, that it's hard for me to see past the downside right now. A 33% strikeout rate is untenable, and it almost seemed like he was just going through the motions on a bad White Sox team. I have no way to gauge what I'll be getting from him, nor for how long, and I can't help but feel like it'll be a wasted pick again. I'm willing to wait him out and grab a more bankable but lower upside, say a Suzuki or Brian Reynolds type instead.
All right, JJ Bleday, former top 50 prospect, got a chance to play last year, and he was okay in a boring way. JJ Bleday, Chris?
I think he's a perfectly fine, boring number 5 outfielder. I think there's very little upside there, but if you end up with him as your number 5 outfielder, he probably just stays there the whole year.
Jordan Walker, post-hype prospect, has yet to figure it out. He's still 22 years old.
Haven't read anything that really inspires me to draft him. He fell a long way in my TGFBI league, and I found that I didn't really want to use a pick on him either. I just have no confidence anymore. He's young enough, he could put it all together, but I don't have any reason for optimism this year specifically.
There was something earlier in the offseason. He said he worked with coaches to get back to his old swing, which he had much more success with in the minors. So maybe that can help. He also dealt with a knee injury here in camp. That was Jordan Walker. Last name on the list is Tyler Soderstrom.
What are you talking about? We talked about him earlier.
Soderstrom.
We talked about him a little bit earlier in the podcast.
Did we?
We compared him to Ben and Bryce, and
we didn't say anything about him.
You said his name. That was
so. I think the most interesting thing about Tyler Soderstrom is the fact that he might play some catcher this year, because I think he's probably stretched as a corner infielder. Although I can see a path to him being a useful fantasy option as a corner infielder. He hits the ball very hard. There could be plus power here. It was 85th percentile barrel rate. Close to 80th percentile hard hit, 80th percentile average exit velocity.
I like him.
Park upgrade for sure. That was going from a very tough park to one that we think will be at least neutral. It's just if he's only first base eligible, there's a lot of first basemen who can hit 25 homers with a 240 batting average. There are only 6 catchers who could do that. So if he gets catcher eligibility relatively early, I think you could be talking about a top 12 player at the position. It's just, how long does it take to get there?
He does go later than the Rhys Hoskins and all those kind of sluggers we were talking about. 279 is the ADP over the past week for Soderstrom.
But he goes earlier than Jonathan Aranda.
I think I have Soderstrom just ahead of him, but I do like...
I'd rather have Soderstrom than Aranda.
Not me.
Well...
We'll
agree.
That's why I never drafted Soderstrom.
But I like some of the plate discipline stuff. He hits the ball really hard. Getting out of Oakland, I could see a 25 home run season coming for Tyler Soderstrom. All right, guys, we did it. We are going to wrap there. For Scott and Chris, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball Today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify, and we will be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.